We've seen allusions to what happened Saturday in Pennsylvania repeatedly this week. I think the first day they kind of eased into it because they wanted to have the big moment where he came out with the bandage on his ear.
Which we've done reporting that people in the audience are also now
wearing their own bandages. This the wardrobe item of the convention.
Which has a throwback to Nelly, if you're familiar with the Nelly.
Oh, now we have a cultural reference that we both know.
Yeah, exactly.
Wasn't 2000s. It the Band-Aid under the eye? Wasn't that
something like that?
Okay, we can check that out.
Welcome to the Campaign Moment on this Friday, July 19th. I'm Martine Powers, co-host of Post Reports.
And I'm Aaron Blake, senior political reporter and author of the Campaign Moment newsletter. We're joined today by the perfect person to break down this very complicated, very bifurcated moment in our politics where we're torn between what's happening with Republicans and Democrats. It's a man who's forgotten more about politics than I'll ever know. Our chief correspondent for national politics here at the Post, Dan Baltz. Hey, Dan.
Hey, Aaron.
Dan, thank you so much for being here.
Nice to be here. Quite a week.
No kidding. And of course, we are all here in Milwaukee, where the Republicans have just wrapped up their national convention. And as you might be able to hear during this conversation, things are getting wrapped up and broken down. People are taping things up and collapsing tables in the background.
Lots of dumpsters in this convention hall. Yes. I will say that right now.
Very loud, disruptive dumpsters. So right now we're sitting here just a little bit before midnight on Thursday, and Donald Trump has formally accepted his party's nomination to be president.
4 months from now, we will have an incredible victory, and we will begin the 4 greatest years in the history of our country.
So, Dan, you wrote earlier this week that one pretty unusual thing about this convention is that Democrats have been the ones to dominate the news, even though it's not their convention that's happening this week. They've kind of flipped the script. I'm wondering if you can just give us briefly a 30,000-foot view of how this week went for both parties and that split screen of what's going on right now.
It was an extraordinary week. We knew it was going to be an extraordinary week after the shock of the assassination attempt against former President Trump on Saturday, which established a tone and a sense of a moment that didn't exist before that. I mean, we knew this was going to be a big event. Conventions are big events. This is a very competitive election. But that set a tone. And what we saw from that moment on was a Republican Party that came together as we've seen only a handful of times at national conventions. This is a party that came in pretty united and left, I think, even more united. And all of the unity is around the former president. I mean, this is not a unity of ideas and issues. This is all about Donald Trump. And that made it interesting.
And throws into relief what's happening with Democrats right now at this moment of chaos and division.
That's exactly right. And kind of right in the middle of all of what the Republicans were doing to help themselves, the Democrats, inadvertently waded into the middle of this story this week. We got this resurgence of reports that one senior party leader after another had in one way or another conveyed to President Biden that he was in danger of taking the whole party down to a broad defeat, that in one way or another he had to consider whether he should stay in the race.
Safe to say this was not an easy, chill week for the Democrats. We're going to get into all of that later in the show about the Democrats, the diminishing support for Biden's candidacy. And of course, if you're listening via Post Reports, please follow the Campaign Moment podcast feed because we've had so much analysis about Democratic infighting over there. But first, I want to stick with the GOP for a bit. We just heard the first speech that Donald Trump has given since the assassination attempt. Aaron, what did you make of this speech?
It was really 2 different speeches, I thought, and these speeches are about doing things for political effect. It was clear that that was the goal here. And he spent about 15 minutes talking in detail about what happened on Saturday in Pennsylvania.
It was truly a moment-by-moment, play-by-play.
And he really set it up like that. He said, I'm going to only talk about this once because it's too painful.
It was a warm, beautiful day in the early evening in Butler Township in the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
A lot of it was familiar to those of us who are following this story and kind of have seen the video and know what the play-by-play was.
When I heard a loud whizzing sound and felt something hit me really, really hard on my right ear.
He talked about how he was reacting in the moment.
It can only be a bullet, and moved my right hand to my ear, brought it down. My hand was covered with blood.
He memorialized the firefighter who was killed that day, Corey Comparator. He talked about the two people who were shot. He had Comparator's firefighter uniform. He kissed the helmet. And then I think the moment that really stood out to me was when Trump said, "I'm not supposed to be here."
I'm not supposed to be here tonight. Not supposed to be here. Yeah.
And then he said at the end, "Thank you, but I'm not." He wrapped that all up by talking about the theme that was supposed to be the theme this week, which is unity and bringing people together. And then what we saw after that was a very kind of standard issue Trump stump speech.
The greatest invasion in history is taking place right here in our country. They are coming in from every corner of the earth, not just from South America, but from Africa, Asia, the Middle East. They're coming from everywhere. They're coming at levels that we've never seen before. It is an invasion indeed, and this administration does absolutely nothing to stop them.
People who don't pay attention to those very often might have been a little bit more surprised because there's lots of ad-libbing, there's lots of meandering. He kind of goes off on tangents.
It was a long speech. I mean, it was almost an hour and a half?
It was more than 90 minutes, and a lot of it was pretty much what you'd see if he's on the stump at a regular campaign rally. We were maybe expecting something a little bit different because this is a different venue. This is a convention. You generally want to have something thematic and very tied together, and this was just kind of like a speech that we've seen a lot of times before. And you have to wonder how people who maybe don't watch those speeches or tune in very much, what they might have thought after maybe being grabbed by those first 15 minutes.
Dan, what did you make of the speech?
Well, I agree with Aaron on most of the points he made. I would say that first part in which he talked about the attempted assassination was a powerful moment. And I think particularly for that audience and loyalists of Donald Trump, to kind of relive that was probably a little bit unnerving.
And people were visibly emotional in the crowd.
They absolutely were, yeah. And I think for understandable reasons. I mean, anybody who's in that kind of a position who comes that close to getting shot and killed, we all felt when we heard about it, that this was shocking and should never have happened, but at least it worked out that he was not killed. I think that there was predictability in the other two kind of themes, one of unity. He said things about uniting the country that he doesn't normally say, or he said it in somewhat more detail than he says ever. But then part of the structure of this whole convention was to prosecute a case against the record of President Joe Biden. And he went through that in great detail. He went through it in ways he does on the campaign trail. He did it in ways in which, he was making some stuff up and, there were some distortions and false claims. And
a lot of stuff that to be fact-checked in this speech.
And the fact-checkers will have, a long list of things. But he went through that in ways that this campaign will use over and over and over again to try to say, as he said, we need change in this country, and I'm the change agent.
I also want to take a second to talk about the vibes here, not just in this speech, not just the reactions to this speech, but really the vibes for the whole week. And I have to say, this was my first time attending a political convention. And maybe this is the fact that I haven't seen how excited people can be at a convention before. And Dan, I'd be curious to hear comparisons between your experience of this one and conventions that you've covered in the past. But to me, it just felt like this idea that Trump had escaped with his life on Saturday infused this whole week with a really palpable sense of not only excitement, but almost giddiness. I talked to people milling around outside the convention, and people told me again and again, this is divine intervention. This is God saying, Trump should be the next president. I heard from Rusty Vai from West Tennessee, who got emotional as he was talking about, what it meant to see Trump here.
We're here to celebrate a man who, in my opinion, shouldn't be here. We were fortunate, not we, just the country in general was fortunate that he survived such an attack, and we just hope to bring people together and let's stop all the hate. You know what I mean?
I talked to Paul Ramirez from LA, who said, that this was a game-changing moment.
The Republican Party has always had a bit of a fracture with Donald Trump because he is controversial. The shooting on Saturday, which is terrible and unfortunate, has coalesced us. We are united and we're galvanized behind Trump.
And it really seemed to kind of build on the confidence that Republicans have right now. It's a feeling that, this is Trump's race to lose and that everything is lining up in their favor. And that really speaks to this being a pretty remarkable moment for them.
Well, I think you put your finger on what's different, and that is that the assassination attempt changed the nature of this convention. As you say, there are lots of people here who think there was something providential about all of this and who genuinely do believe that God was there to protect Donald Trump. And I think that brought people even closer to Trump. Now, we know that, throughout his prior presidency and over the last several years, he's reshaped the party in his own image.
And I think it's just important for people to understand that, this is not a convention about the Republican Party. This is a convention that, at least the impression that I got from walking around and just seeing the posters and the merch, this is purely about Trump.
Yeah, the fanatical supporters. I mean, there is a divide in the Republican Party, but you don't see the Republican Party that's resistant to Trump is not here. This is all about Trump. And you don't see people complaining about things that the Trump campaign's moves on abortions or things like that. It's been very much a MAGA convention, I would say.
And I don't want to go too far down on this path, but I did find it notable in the conversations that I had with people. I made sure to bring up this question of abortion because there was reporting around, some differences in the Republican Party platform and the extent to which, largely because of Trump, they're moving away from being kind of adamantly pro-life or looking for a national ban on abortion. And it was just very interesting to me to see all these people who were I'm pro-life, but I get it. And I know it's complicated and we'll get to a national ban eventually, but it's not really important right now. And we're kind of happy to leave it alone. And it's just amazing that would not have been what you would have heard at a Republican National Convention 4 or 8 years ago.
It's a case in point for how much this party is, and especially this convention crowd, is devoted to Trump. The idea that an issue that drives as much passions as abortion, which, much of the Republican Party regards as being murder, tantamount to murder, that would not be a bridge too far for them to water down the platform on that. That signifies how much the party is about Trump the man, and the details are kind of fungible underneath that.
The only thing I would add to that, and I agree with what Aaron said, is that this is also a Republican Party that wants to win this election.
Yep.
And they believe that Donald Trump is the best person to be able to do that. I mean, they think that he's the person best situated to take them back to the White House.
I do want to touch on one other thing that I noticed both in speeches tonight and speeches throughout the week that we've heard, and that is mentions of Vice President Kamala Harris, which feels not accidental in this moment where these questions about Biden's future and who would be his replacement if he did indeed step aside. Obviously, Vice President Harris is high on that list, and it was interesting to hear even the way that people were saying her name.
Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris, the border czar. What a joke.
Our border czar, Kamala Harris. That means so bad.
We reported that nearly half of the references to Kamala in these speeches, they mispronounced her name. What did you make of those moments where Harris gets brought up? And how do you hear Trump and Trump allies kind of raring for what will need to shift if they have to campaign against a different candidate?
Yeah, it's an interesting setup because Republicans had the floor basically for 4 days to drive a message in this campaign. And they did so not being totally sure who their opponent in the general election was going to be. There's some thought that President Biden, having drawn this out and potentially dropping out after the convention, could help Democrats because it means that Harris didn't get a lot of incoming during the convention. There was a lot more focus on Kamala Harris at this convention than 4 years ago. My colleague Philip Bump did a statistical analysis looking at the transcripts of the two conventions. And I think towards the end of this week, especially as we saw the growing questions about whether Biden's going to continue increase, we saw them talking about her more. Today, there was talk by Trump advisors about the idea that, Harris taking over for Biden would be undemocratic. They're kind of trying to get their noses in on this story a little bit. They are confronting the uncertainty that a lot of us are confronting right now, and that's what this campaign's actually going to look like in November.
In some ways, it's a kind of an insurance policy. It's to lay down some markers that can be used later. But they're in a quandary. In many ways, they've been preparing to run against Joe Biden. They would prefer to run against him. They may say that they think Vice President Harris would also be easy to defeat or not that difficult to defeat. But no one knows that. President Biden is much more of a known quantity as a national campaigner than she is. And so they needed to begin to link her to everything about the Biden administration's record that they think people don't like.
Especially because it felt like one of the overriding messages of this week is that Trump is strong, Biden is weak, and that they have the debate performance, the fact that Biden has COVID, and that, that you already heard that kind of playing into how he is just not that voice of strength that America needs, but like up against Kamala Harris, who's younger than Trump and has different strengths. You have questions about how that would play out. So let's take a quick break here, and then when we come back, more and more details are emerging about the pressure campaign to get Joe Biden to drop out of the race. We will dive into that in just a second. So since the debate between Biden and Trump in late June, of course, there have been calls for the president to let another Democrat take his place on the 2024 ticket. And he has been clear for these last few weeks that he wants to stay in the race. He has no intention of leaving. But this week, our Post colleagues have reported, as you mentioned, Dan, that even top-ranking Democrats have doubts about his viability and that they are starting to really share those doubts directly with the president. Can you guys just run down what has been reported and what we've learned as of Thursday night about who is trying to get him to step aside and how they're doing it?
At this point, our colleagues Tyler Pager and Michael Shearer reported that former President Obama also feels that there's probably no viable path for President Biden in the campaign. Chuck Schumer, the leader of the Senate Democrats, paid a visit to Delaware to talk to the president. Hakeem Jeffries, the leader of the House Democrats, had a meeting with him a week ago to convey the feelings of the Democrats in the House. And Nancy Pelosi, the former speaker, has had conversations, or at least one conversation, and I can't recall kind of how many we've enumerated, but she's had conversations with the president where she's conveyed concerns that they would not win back the House and they could lose the Senate. This is obviously unprecedented. It's also extraordinary, that they have gone ahead and done this, that they have taken the steps to deal with this directly and to put it in front of him in a one-on-one meeting. But it's also extraordinary that he has continued to hold out.
Yeah, even as of Thursday morning, we had the deputy campaign manager saying, he was asked about this and he says, I don't want to be rude, but I don't know how many times we can say this. President Biden is staying in this race.
Yes. But the deputy campaign manager is not on the inside of the campaign. He's a very capable person, but the circle around the president is very small. The president has made these declarations, and those who work for the campaign are duty-bound to follow them until something changes. So he was speaking essentially what is the party line. There are only a handful of people around the president, and one of the things that the Post has reported and others have reported subsequently is that the circle around him seems to be smaller than ever.
We also saw on Thursday, I think, the second senator to call for Biden to actually drop out. There are very few Democrats who have actually said he should drop out. A lot of this is sending coded messages and leaks that are coming out. Senator John Tester from Montana joined Peter Welch from Vermont in calling for Biden to drop out. There's about 24 members of Congress who have done this so far. At this point, it's coming from so many sides. The messages are different. People are taking different tacks. But I think the thing that unites all of it is there are so many people who are agitating in one direction, and it is not the direction of the Biden campaign saying this decision is made, this is done. And then I think the other thing that's also really significant that I've noticed in recent days is that even as this effort has built and become even more pronounced, we are not seeing the Biden loyalists step forward and really stand up for him and say, we need to stick by this guy.
Well, I mentioned earlier that the other kind of kink in this week for Democrats is that Biden has COVID and he's back in Delaware resting up, and it seems like he doesn't have a serious case. But it does feel like this is happening at this critical juncture, and him being at home with his family, recuperating. And I'm curious, how do you think that this is going to play out? Like, this COVID diagnosis, does that matter? And like, what are the questions that you're asking about how the next few days are going to unfold?
Well, I think that the COVID diagnosis certainly does matter because it plays to the question of his strength and stamina. Now, we know about COVID, particularly in the kind of post-pandemic period, that it has been much rougher on older people than younger people. Lots of people get it. We know people all summer have been getting it, and not just older people. But when it strikes somebody who is 81, almost 82 years old, there is a higher level of concern about that because of the impact that it could have. Now, every indication we have, again, is that it is a mild case, as you said, and that he's on Paxlovid and presumably will bounce back fairly quickly. I think it's very difficult to kind of play this out day by day. We don't know what he's really thinking. We don't know whether he's thinking, well, I do need to think harder about this. I've said I'm going to be a candidate, but people don't seem to think they agree with that. Maybe I should think about it. Or maybe because we know President Biden is a stubborn person, always has had a chip on his shoulder about the elites, whether he is taking this in and saying, I'm going to prove them wrong once again, and that this is, in a sense, stiffening his opposition to those who are calling for him to get out.
Even though those calls are getting louder and louder.
They are, but there's been an ebb and flow to this, and there's been days when it looked like he was kind of, hanging by a thread, and then there are other days when it looks like he's pushed it back. We're in a phase right now where it's moving. It seems to be moving strongly against him, but we're going to have to just watch and wait.
The other thing I wonder about is, Dan just talked about Biden being a stubborn person. All politicians who get to a certain level have a healthy ego. They have pride. Biden's been in office for a long time. He's confronting the potential end of his career right now. This week, there was also, as we saw stories about Barack Obama getting involved in this and maybe questioning whether there was a path to victory, there's some hard feelings there, too, because Obama wanted Hillary Clinton in 2016 instead of Joe Biden. And we saw a pretty harsh comment from somebody in Biden world responding to that, basically saying, look how that turned out for you in 2016 with her as the nominee.
Oh, wow.
You do wonder if,
this is airing some old beef between political operatives and politicians.
Everyone is dealing with this very gingerly because that's what's called for in the moment, but also time is running short and they feel that there is an impetus to act in the next couple of weeks because that's when they need to get this figured out by. And we're just kind of seeing that as we get closer to a potential, decision or kind of the rubber meeting the road, like more desperate measures can get people more dug in and lead to more hard feelings. It's just going to be really interesting to watch.
I think part of the dynamic has been that the Democrats do not want to embarrass President Biden. They have been hopeful that he would come to a decision himself.
But now that the window is getting smaller.
But we are now reaching a point where there is not a lot of time left between now and the Democratic convention. We're a month away from that in a few days. So people recognize that, time is running short to resolve this. And the question is, how does President Biden see that? What is he thinking about that? Does he even factor in those kinds of considerations? Does it matter to him about the timing of some of these things? We don't know the answers to those questions.
That seems like the question that we're going to be asking for the next few hours and days as this all unfolds. I think we have to end it there, but thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dan Baltz is chief correspondent covering national politics for The Post, and Aaron Blake is a senior political reporter and author of the Campaign Moment newsletter. And Aaron, what should they do?
Always subscribe to the Campaign Moment newsletter.
Yes, we love to hear it. And one more thing, since we recorded this interview late last night, several more Democratic lawmakers have publicly called on President Joe Biden to step aside, including Senator Martin Heinrich of New Mexico. That's it for this week on The Campaign Moment. You might be hearing this on Post Reports, and we're going to keep bringing you these conversations on Fridays, but you can hear more from Aaron and our other very smart colleagues by also following the Campaign Moment show feed itself. That is where we've been dropping episodes throughout the week with the latest Washington Post reporting and insights about all the twists and turns of what has suddenly become a very dynamic campaign season. So be sure to follow and subscribe to The Campaign Moment on your podcast app. Today's episode was produced by Laura Benshoff and Charla Freeland and mixed by Sam Baer. It was edited by Rena Flores, Lucy Perkins, and Mary Jo Murphy. Our team also includes Maggie Penman, Monica Campbell, Ted Muldoon, Alana Gordon, Ariel Plotnick, Bishop Sand, Rennie Svirnovsky, Sabby Robinson, Emma Talkoff, Sean Carter, Peter Bresnan, Trinity Webster Bass, Ali Bianco, Allison Michaels, Renita Jablonski, and Alahe Azadi. And I'm Martine Powers. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.